Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated. You can follow him on Twitter at CBB_Central. Kevin, what's going on, man?
What's up, man? How are you?
Doing great. I mean, it's been an interesting tournament. 4-1 seeds. It's been kind of talked about how chalky this tournament has been, and it ultimately ends up being 4-1 seeds in the Final Four. What's been your overall takeaway from this tournament as we get to the Final Four now?
Yeah, look, I don't think it was overly surprising that this is where we wound up. I felt like probably from early February on, these four had sort of separated themselves as the clear four best teams in college basketball. Obviously, they were all challenged in different ways. Florida had to make that comeback against Texas Tech. We obviously saw Houston need that buzzer beater against Purdue. Even Auburn was down 9 against Michigan and had to rally in the second half. So it's not as though these teams have been unblemished, but I always felt like they were the best teams, the most talented teams, the most complete teams, and that's manifested itself so far in the tournament. We should have an unbelievable Final Four with those four left standing.
I want to get into those teams individually here in just a second, but I'm curious, the discussion has been, is the NIL era, the transfer portal and all this creating a world in which there will be no more Cinderellas? And then you look back a couple of years ago and you had an 8 seed there. You had Florida Atlantic there, and it was people that you maybe weren't expecting to get there. Is this a one-off sort of deal, or is this is a new trend and we could see this coming more often now?
Look, I think NIL has made it a lot harder for mid-majors to build the level of rosters it takes to go deep in the tournament. Or if nothing else, I think the quality in low and mid-major leagues as a whole is a lot lower than it was 5 to 10 years ago. But I also think the mid-majors we had in this tournament were very good, and it just turned out that some of them got bad matchups, some of them had bad shooting nights, whatever. I don't think Cinderella is dead by any means. I think it'll be different. I also think, look, I know there's a lot of talk like, the 4-1 seeds must be there. Those must be the teams that have the most money. Like, Florida and Auburn weren't even in the top 5 of the SEC in NIL this year. Like, they built elite teams because they had guys coming back. They did a great job of evaluating guys in the portal. Houston's all been about retention. They're not a team that's dropping crazy bags in the portal. And then Duke, obviously, they have access to players with or without money. That's the way they've been for a long time. So I don't necessarily view this as sort of the NIL Final Four. I do think the barrier to entry has gotten a lot higher, and you're going to need resources to go get players, and that'll be somewhat of a prerequisite going forward to have high-level teams. But this isn't as simple as though, if you've got the most money, you will be one of the 4 teams left standing.
Talking with Kevin Sweeney here on the Rude Guest Hotline on BMitch and Finlay. Tobi Altizer in for BMitch today. JP will be back in just a little bit. So with the NIL stuff, do you think this is going to even out at some point, and in 5-6 years we see it get back to more of what we knew before, and it kind of evens itself out with some of the regulations that they're going to be put on, and you can maybe see some of these teams rise back up instead of maybe going to some big time school where you're going to maybe sit the bench? Maybe this is something that's more of a football question than a basketball question, but that you could see some of these teams maybe not be able to keep guys for 4 years, but keep them for a pair of years and go on some more memorable runs like we're used to seeing in March?
Yeah, look, I think the gap will always be there now between the haves and the have-nots, quote unquote, just in terms of, we're not putting the toothpaste back in the tube in terms of teams spending $3, $4, $5 million on their rosters. And I don't think there's ever really a world where low and mid-major teams will do that. But I do think that there will be some incremental changes over the next couple of years that help. I think some level of a budget being put in place that teams can't go over, and the hope is that the House settlement does bring that, will help quite a bit. I think some form of contracts and multi-year deals so that schools can lock in a guy for multiple seasons would be big. I think one of the ideas that's been tossed around a lot is some sort of poaching fee or a transfer fee like you'd have in soccer overseas, where, hey, if Kentucky steals Drexel's best player, like, Kentucky's got to give Drexel a cut of what they paid the kid, and I think that would be something that could help even the playing field a bit. Like, Duke and Kentucky have never been on the same playing field as St. Peter's and FAU, right? That you've always had to do more with less. I think that'll still be the case, and I don't think those stories are going away. I just think it'll be a little bit harder.
When you look at this Final Four, I think it's interesting that, to me, the 2 best teams in the country all year have been Auburn and Duke, and right now, according to the betting odds, Auburn is fourth out of the teams with a potential, obviously all one seeds. Anybody can win, but what do you make of Auburn's chances going into this one? And do you have any update on the health of Jani Broome?
Yeah, no updates. I do expect him to play from what I've been told. He's been banged up, but has been battling through it. Now has this elbow injury to add to the mix. It's funny. I feel like a lot of people hopped off the Auburn bandwagon based on really 2 weeks in March once they had already clinched not only the SEC championship, but essentially the overall number 1 seed. And they lost at Texas A&M, who was a top 4 seed, against Alabama by 2 in overtime, and then Tennessee, who was an Elite 8 team. So they've been very good in the tournament. 3 double-digit wins, and then obviously controlled things against Michigan State. I feel pretty good about where they are. Obviously, they'll get Florida, who beat them once already and beat them in their home gym. Florida creates a lot of matchup issues just because of their size and physicality. One of the few teams that can match Auburn on that front. But this is a Auburn team that for much of the year looked historically good, and I think they've probably been written off a little too early.
Yeah, and I think the top team right now, tell me if you disagree, is Duke with what they're able to do. I thought their game against Alabama was so impressive from what they were able to do from a defensive standpoint. Who's their best match, or who's their worst matchup? Who's the team that's going to give them the toughest shot of the 3 that are left?
I think Florida's the best team, but I think Houston's probably the most tricky matchup just because the way they play is so unconventional, right? Houston, the way they defend, they're going to send 2 to the ball. They're not going to let you get into your actions. And when Duke is comfortable, you cannot beat them. The teams that have pushed them a little bit have been able to be a little bit more disruptive defensively, and that's Houston's MO. If they can keep Duke out of the lane, not allow Cooper Flagg to fly downhill, and force them to take, they're a great shooting team, but force them to take contested threes, I think you have a chance to keep the score down and hang around. I just think right now they're playing so well offensively. They have so few holes because they get offensive rebounds. They protect the rim with Malowach. Con Knipple was unbelievable against Alabama. Yeah, I just think you have to find ways to disrupt them and take them out of what they do. I think Houston's the most equipped to do that.
You know what? It's been fascinating kind of watching the tourney unfold here. I know the first and second round ratings were through the roof. Maybe it's too early for that kind of information, but just in your work, have you noticed any, just the lack of drama, the lack of buzzer beaters, all that? Has it impacted what you think is kind of interest in it?
Yeah, I haven't really noticed it either way. Obviously, that's for maybe for the big wigs to answer more than me, unfortunately. I think there's always been a feeling this year that the elite teams are going to be hard to knock off their pedestal, and we've had some incredible endings. Obviously, Texas Tech, Arkansas, then a couple of days later with Texas Tech and Florida, the buzzer beater with the Houston game. I know that happened real late on the East Coast, but it was a true March moment. So. I do think it's probably lacked a little bit of the drama we usually have, or maybe the one, super compelling storyline maybe would be the biggest thing is, whether it's the Cinderella or, UConn's back-to-back last year. If they had beaten Florida, obviously they would have become a huge story this past week. We've probably lacked that, but I think it sets up for some incredible storylines with 2 coaches under 40 trying to win a national championship at Duke and Florida, following in footsteps of elite coaches in the past, of obviously Billy Donovan and Coach K, or old guys like Bruce Pearl and Kelvin Sampson, who've done unbelievable jobs for a really long time trying to finally break through.
Yeah, I mean, this Final Four it is obviously heavyweights. Getting all ones to the Final Four is both kind of cool and kind of disappointing, I guess. Duke's the betting favorite. It sounded like that you think they're the toughest team left.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I just think they have so many ways to beat you. That's the thing that's so scary. Like, even when Cooper doesn't play at an elite level, the way that these other guys have emerged over the last month has just made it so hard to play against them.
Yeah, I mean, they're loaded. A big story here in the D.C. area is obviously what's going on at University of Maryland. I'm done talking about the guy that left, but I am curious about what you think are the real options for a new coach.
Yeah, look, it's a messy situation, and it's a really challenging one to navigate right now, because not only do you not have an AD or the maybe traditional infrastructure in place to go make a hire? But you're at the back end of the hiring cycle, and a lot of the guys that were the biggest names, in the mix, they've taken other jobs. Sean Miller would have been sort of a layup coming from Xavier, and he goes to Texas last week, and that sets off the quite the chain of events, but it doesn't end up setting up Maryland any better. So I think that's the challenge, right? Is who can you go get that's available? I think the Buzz Williams thing you'll hear just because he's a proven high major name who wants the job by all accounts. But I wouldn't necessarily expect that to be the choice. I think there's mid-major guys regionally, like Tony Skinn, who've done phenomenal jobs and deserve looks. And I think it could totally be a situation where they go to the NBA route, which has been something that a lot of teams have done here in recent weeks and months, starting with BYU going after Kevin Young. I think with the resources at play in NIL, it's a little easier to come in with a pro mindset, and especially with where they are, it wouldn't shock me if maybe that's the direction they go.
Talking with Kevin Sweeney on BMitch and Finlay, Tobi Altizer in for BMitch today. I'm curious nationally. I think here the issue that a lot of people have with Willard leaving is nothing to do with the actual Villanova job. It's the way that he left. But I'm curious from a national perspective, how is the Villanova job viewed compared to Maryland? I mean, I understand that it's probably a step up, but is it a big step up, or is it just kind of getting away from the Big Ten and going to the Big East kind of move?
Yeah, I think I have the beholder to a degree. Look, Villanova is very attractive. They have unbelievable money. It's in one of the best basketball cities in America. It's a place that's won national championships. If you're a Big East person like Kevin Willard is, the opportunity to be in that league, get counsel from Jay Wright, like all those things are very, very appealing. And it comes with, maybe fewer headaches than the Maryland job, where you're navigating, DC area high school basketball politics and, national Big Ten stuff. Like everything about that job is sort of politically fraught. I think Villanova maybe a little bit more simple to navigate. Look, I agree with you that the way he left is frustrating. It's also exactly what he did when he left Seton Hall to come to Maryland. Like, this is who Kevin Willard is. Love him, hate him, something in between. Like, he's that kind of, he's not been great at making exits, and this one wasn't pretty. But yeah, look, I don't fault him. I think Villanova is a good job. It's probably perceived, I would say, maybe a hair above Maryland in the landscape, but outside of the truly elite jobs, I think a lot of them are very much fit dependent and sort of eye of the beholder.
I tend to agree with you there. I think, how much credence do you give to this? I mean, I've heard it more and more in the last week that Big East basketball jobs may be more appealing because they're not competing with football.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's something that a lot of people in my world have been talking about for a couple months as a sort of trickle-down effect from the House settlement. Essentially, if you've got a cap in your athletic department of $20 million, most of that money's got to go to football. You can still spend 20 at Villanova if you'd like, and you could spend all 20 on basketball if you wanted to. Now, they won't, but you could easily get to 7-8 here, and you'll see that with some of the programs in that league. And
hold on. Will they get the same amount of money as those that have football teams, or they get a smaller portion?
No, they can. So essentially, the cap is set based on what football schools can spend. That it's a share of their revenue, and then everyone below that can share up to that amount. Even though $20 million would be a huge percentage of a Big East school's revenue versus a football school's. If they want to do it, they could. So if their boosters want to, scrounge together all the money and donate it to the department and then do that, they can. Now, look, here's what I would say. The SEC and the Big Ten will not allow themselves to be outbid long. They will find a loophole. They will find a hole in the rules. This is not something that is sustainable long term. But this spring, yeah, there's certainly a case to be made that it'll be easier to build an elite roster at Villanova than it would be at Maryland. Yeah,
I just, when I've heard that working theory, I can understand and process it right. But at the same time, it's like Florida, Bama, Tennessee, Auburn, they all just kind of over the last 5-10 years, whatever, have decided to invest in basketball. They're not going to stop doing that.
Correct. Yeah, look, the SEC is not keen on not having the most of everything. Okay? They will find a way, better or worse, to make sure that they're very competitive conversations. Again, unless this new enforcement arm, run by Deloitte, has real teeth, which a lot of folks are relatively skeptical of. If it does, then yeah, there's a world where the Big East could just blow everybody's budgets out the water. But I also think at the end of the day, if it settles that most Big Ten and SEC teams are spending $3 to $4 million on a roster, the Big East isn't going to spend $8 million. It's just bad business. They'll spend $5 million. They'll spend $4.5 million. Right. They'll jump you by a couple $100,000. So I don't necessarily buy that like long term. Oh yeah, Villanova will be doubling the budget of Maryland until you have to go there. That to me is probably an overreaction.
I agree with that, dude. So how realistic? I don't know if you saw this, but Steve Blake is obviously a legend at Maryland, part of a national title team, played in the NBA forever. He threw his hat in the ring to be a coach via Twitter. Like, how realistic is any of this? And is college basketball just kind of stodgy in that, like, oh, you got to hire somebody with experience on, their third college to be a Big Ten coach?
So what I would say is this: if you're campaigning on Twitter, it means you don't have any traction. Generally, Jay Williams did this with Georgetown a couple of years ago, and it was sort of the same thing. Like, if you had calls to make, you would have made those before you started tweeting about wanting the job. So I would be shocked if it's Steve Blake. I do think, like, again, you're going to see the sort of rise of the celebrity coach, rise of the guy with ties to the program, rise of guys who can raise money. And obviously Steve Blake is an incredible basketball mind, knows more than most have forgotten about the game. But I do think some baseline level coaching experience is probably the most important thing. And we've seen a lot of these hires where you do go for someone who is less experienced fail relatively quickly. So I do think if you're Maryland, you probably want someone with a little bit more coaching background than Steve has.
It's going to be interesting. So you think is there any way Chris Beard comes to College Park? He's a former Under Armour guy, right?
I think it would probably be in the hands of Maryland, not Chris Beard. Chris Beard would love to get a high-level job, whether it's Maryland, whether it's any other job. He has not gotten a lot of traction because of his past. I honestly don't know.
He got arrested for something, right?
He did. I don't know what the background will be in terms of the president and the interim AD and everyone involved. But as you said, if there's someone that can make a call, it would be the Under Armour folks. And if they vouch for Chris Beard, maybe that changes things a little bit.
I just Googled that. Domestic stuff is difficult, but he's at Ole Miss. I don't know. That's a tricky line. I know that I wanted them to hire Pitino, and they didn't. And the concern, the irony of this, the concern about hiring Pitino is they're like, oh, well, how long is he going to stick around? Well, how long did the guy you hired stick around? Kevin, thank you for the time, bro. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, fellas.
All right. Kevin Sweeney, Field of 68. Give him a follow at CBB_Central